Okay, I think we're live. Welcome everyone to the BookTube SFF live show, the award live show. This year we had a bit of a breather from things in the middle, so we are now back on track and we're excited to bring you the live show, the judges live show, and also the popular vote at the end of each category. So there are 9 judges, which means that we are going to be switching them in and out throughout the course of this live show. So don't be confused if you don't see everyone on screen. They will be popping in as and when. And we're going to go through the categories kind of from the smallest one up to the biggest ones, or that's the order we're doing them in. I will put a banner on screen about which categories we're on so that it's clear for everyone, because I've figured out how to use banners, which is very exciting. So we're going to do the short fiction category first. So we have 4 judges for the short fiction category who are going to talk to you guys about the books in that category. So I'm going to hand over to them. All of the links for all the judges and all the social medias are in the description, so you can find all of their channels if you don't already know them. And let's just dive straight in. So short fiction, shall we talk about This Is How You Lose the Time War first up? And Claire, do you want to give us your thoughts?
Yeah, so This Is How You Lose the Time War. This is a book that I was primed to absolutely love because it's time travel and has letters, epistolary, that's the word. It didn't work the best for me. I'm a basic bench and I like a lot of plot. And I like when there's a bit more of an obvious resolution. I realize this is making me sound like, I just need everything spelled out, but it's just it is a very beautifully written book. Like the prose in that book is certainly beautiful, and I feel like it's probably something that I need to reread again now that I know what it is, so that I can not be surprised by what it is and enjoy it more. But for me, I read it and appreciated that it was good and well put together, but it wasn't my favorite, just because there are things that I just wanted to know more about, and then some other things that I was like, it did what it wanted to do, and I think it achieved what it wanted to do. It just wasn't my favorite thing that it was trying to do. So, I'm disappointed that I couldn't love it, but I didn't love it.
Lee, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So I did really love this. For me, it worked really, really well because I loved the play of the 2 writers playing off each other as they each wrote one of the characters. I loved the way that they riffed off each other. I loved the way that relationship developed in those little pieces. And it is true that it wasn't necessarily a super plot-driven story, but I thought that the prose worked so well. And this one, I read it so quickly because I was so entranced by these small glimpses into other places in the universe and other parts of the timeline. I loved it. For me, this worked incredibly well. Totally, totally loved this one.
Exciting. Najiri?
I absolutely loved it as well. I thought that the prose was stunning. It was such a deliciously confusing first third of the story, but I trusted the authors to keep my little brain, actually my big brain, safe while moving through. So it wasn't so confusing as to be disorienting for me. And because I had been told to expect a bit of a sort of rabbit hole, I kind of jumped into it all in. So it gave me enough plot and enough context to feel connected. I found that the love stories, because I think there were more than one, but the main love story is really beautiful, clever and poetic. I love the letters back and forth. I found myself feeling really sort of into the wordplay and into the little bits of clues and stuff in the warped timeline. I thought it was stunning. I felt that for such a short story, I was able to actually envision what the landscapes were like, what the different environments were like. And I loved like the really stark changes from environment to environment. And of course, it was very queer. It was absolutely beautiful. And I feel like both the authors worked well together, like their voices together were really, really nice. So it was clever and stunning, and I absolutely adored it.
Great. Sounds promising. And
so I'm with Claire on this one. I was really expecting to love this. The way people pitch it, the plot, like it just had a lot of elements that I thought I would really like. And I had no idea what was going on like the whole time. Like I don't disagree that the writing is beautiful, but I had no idea what it was trying to say. And I just spent the whole short story like so confused that there's no way I could enjoy it. And so I was very disappointed. But I guess I'm also very basic in that I like to know what's actually happening in the story. And I just couldn't understand it. And I was very disappointed, sadly.
Yeah, I think it also depends like how something like that is pitched, you know. I've not read Max Gladstone's fiction before, but I've read Aman Al-Mutar before, and, you know, her Hugo-winning short story that was a take on fairy tales was really, really beautiful and very, like, clear to understand. You know, I 100% don't believe that they, you know, tried to write something, like, that had a clear plot you could follow, and then they just didn't manage. Like, they clearly were aiming to do what they did.
Right.
I just think it's going to be, I expected it, you know, when someone tells you, like, you know, star-crossed lovers on different sides of a time, I just kind of expected, like, adventuriness and stuff. But, you know, I think I'm interested in rereading it in future with knowing what it is, because I do think, for me, part of it was, like, an expectation thing versus, you know, what the book actually was.
Yeah. I feel like we had to let go into it, right? Because I knew at the beginning that I had to, and it was a struggle in the first 10 pages. I also did a hybrid read, so I read it and I also listened to it at the same time. I think that really helped get a sense of what was going on, and it helped create some continuity, even though the story in and of itself felt chaotic at points. But yeah, I had to read it with a really light touch because I couldn't follow some of the parts, but I also was okay with that.
So I read it exactly the same way. Like, I read the ebook while listening to the audiobook, and it did work really, really well that way. The thing that I loved about it, and the reason that I felt like it worked, even though it didn't bother to explain itself, is that it felt so playful. Like, even as it was dealing with some very serious, like, subject matter, it felt like a really playful approach to the story, and I loved that.
Sure. Great discussion. It looks like the comments as well is kind of a little bit split on different similar kind of views of you guys. So I've also read this. I wasn't judging this category, but I kind of started out in the camp of Claire and Jade, and then ended up in your camp. So it's completely like a 180 for me in the middle, where I changed my mind. But we'll come back to that one. Let's move on to the next one in the short fiction. So The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. Same order. Let's go through that way and dive in as you want.
So this is a book that wants to talk about immigration and has some very deep, crucial misunderstandings about what immigration is and what is scary about it. And it spends the entire book talking about how the technology is what is scary about immigration, because there is a technology that is going to allow you to judge whether or not people are going to be, like, good, decent citizens. But the technology is scary, and it's like, but that's not what immigration is for. Immigration is not for deciding whether people are going to be decent citizens. That's not the point of the immigration system. So anyway, this book was trash. I hated it. And it was no, but you know what? The thing is, this is somebody who has chosen to write about the British immigration system and the citizenship test for the British immigration system. This is somebody who does not reside, has not immigrated into the UK, and has chosen to write a book about a thing that I've personally gone through. And number one, the citizenship test is not like the main thing. Like, that's one part of it, and it's quite small, and you just learn some shit by heart. The scary bit about the immigration system is all the rest of the stuff you have to do to prove that, like, you make enough money to, like, not be a pleb in the eyes of the Home Office, which is full of quotas and doesn't give a shit about you. And I feel like there is this kind of, like, people were talking about it in terms of, like, Black Mirror, right? And it's this, like, you know, oh no, technology is so scary, and Black Mirror has done better in terms of that in recent years. But, like, no, I mean, it just felt really simplistic that, you know, that was the scary thing, was like, oh no, this scary technology. And, like, also I just don't feel like it was written very well, because there were times where it did something. It you know, the narration, there was a written thing in the narration, and I was like, I can tell you probably think you're a good guy and you didn't try to write an extremely racist thing, but that's very racist. Like, in the narration, if you're saying in the narration, like, oh, well, the only people who don't trust cops are criminals, and your character doesn't actually push back against that, then they are agreeing with that. And obviously that's not true. And I read this book, like, in, you know, I don't know, February or whatever. Like, I read this book before the entire world was talking a lot more about the issue of police brutality than they had been before. And it was already ludicrous at that point. And I am sure that's not what the author meant to do. But I think in particular that bit, I was just like, you wrote it bad. So anyway, didn't like it.
So fair enough. Lee, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, not really. Except to say that for me, the judging in this category, the test would not even be included in what it came down to for me as a possible winner for this one. I'm always very hesitant to rate a book or to judge a book immediately after finishing it, because like, this one punches you in the face with its story, right? Like, with the way that it wraps up, it really, like, and that's its goal, is to, like, hit you really hard with what this story does, and it sends you on this, like, kind of emotional spiral. Like, the way I described it was like, my brain felt like an exclamation mark for like half an hour after I had finished this, and, like, that is all I was capable of processing. But with a little bit more time, and also with a little bit more research into this book, into its broader implications, I would say that for me, sorry about that, adding on to what Claire just said, I would say that in judging the best short work, this isn't even a contender for the top one for me.
Yeah, I hated it. And you know, as I was reading it, like, every 10 pages, I was like, the deep didn't make it. Like, I was just thinking about all of these other books that were better, objectively better, that should have been shortlisted. So I was angry for most of the read. I think it was lazy in its analysis. Mm-hmm. I think that it was gratuitously shocking while missing the mark, which was amazing, how you could put so much effort into shock and then not actually make a fucking point. So I had an issue with that. Also, how the characters of color were portrayed in the story. I think that there were tons of gaps. There were opportunities to actually comment. Like, there were opportunities to comment appropriately on, like, otherness, whiteness, systemic oppression, like, all of these things. The topic of immigration, and I'm a Canadian. I don't know about the UK system, but I know a little bit about the Canadian system. And I was like, this is a great topic that speculative fiction needs to get into. And the questions, the themes at the core of this story are really important. how do we decide who gets in and who can't get in? What does it mean to be ready for society or to contribute? Like, as a lawyer, as a Black queer woman, it was like I was looking forward to it. So I found myself having to find things to interest me, right? So I got caught up in some of the conflict. I thought a lot about the violence and the choices around the violence. I think the one thing that this book did really well, though, was to demonstrate the potential for violence and trauma that one must go through when they have to participate in an immigration system, and the control. There was a really interesting commentary about the control that governments and systems have over bodies that are trying to pass through, right? But so many missed opportunities to address Islamophobia, like just so much there. And I was just rolling my eyes and really, really disappointed, and at points offended that this book made it, and that I had to read it. So it was a painful read for me, and I didn't like it. So, yes, failed the test.
Okay, so my heart is pounding right now, but I really liked it.
You're allowed to like things that we didn't like, by the way.
I mean, I guess I didn't really like. Okay, so when I read, I don't necessarily always, I don't know, think that hard about it, like the social bits of it. I thought it was like a lot like Black Mirror, like Claire was saying, and I wasn't expecting to like it because I went in thinking like, okay, this plot sounds really boring. It's like an immigration test. Like this is going to be a flop for me. But I ended up really enjoying it. It was just kind of adventure-y and like fun for me. Fun is a weird word because obviously there are some heavy topics, but I guess, like I said, I didn't like think too hard about it. And I also really like the ending. The ending made like kind of put the rest of the book in a different light for me, and just kind of makes you think about like unintended consequences of people who have good intentions, sort of thing. And I don't know, I really liked that part of it, but I really liked it.
Controversial there. Just to be different, but that's good. It's always good. It shows that, you know, everyone has different opinions on books, and there's certain things in each one that everyone picks up on or other people don't pick up on. So
yeah, but it makes me feel bad that I like something that other people like find offensive, you know.
We all have very problematic favorites and things we enjoy. I think it's just listening and recognizing when people bring stuff up and you're like, oh yeah, I didn't notice that, but now you've mentioned it, you know, I'm going to rethink.
Also, for me, I will say, like, it was a very personal thing, right? Because, like, this is literally a thing I did. This is literally a thing I did several years ago because I thought, you know, there are some things going on in the UK and I don't want to risk getting kicked out. And, you know, as a cis, straight, white woman from like a middle class background from a country that the UK gets along with, I mean, you know, part of that is I'm neuroatypical, and that's really not what what the system is designed to, you know, privilege. But, you know, there were bits of it that felt really kind of devalorizing, dehumanizing, stuff like that, and they were very different bits, and he didn't address that at all. Like, you know, it just felt like, well, yes, the test is stupid because many British citizens can't answer the test questions. I knew the test questions when I studied for the test. Now I don't know them anymore, and it's fine because I'm British now, so, you know. But it's not just, you know, it just, we all bring really personal things, right? And like for me, this just like was not just that. Yeah, it's buttons. It's pushed to them, as you can see. So.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, let's go on to the next one then, because I'm interested to see how this is going to play out. So the next one was To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. Claire, I'm going to dive into this.
This one's interesting for me because it has a relatively open ending without going into spoilers. The ending is kind of open, and I normally don't like that. But with this one, I thought it worked. I thought the concept was really interesting. I quite enjoyed it. I really like the type of stories that Becky Chambers usually likes to tell. Like, I like this type of sci-fi. I didn't love like every single thing about, like, there were bits of the story that felt a little bit more, you know, like not difficult to read, but just a bit like, oh, this is miserable, can they get a break? But overall, I quite liked it, and I think for me it's my favorite out of all of them, just because like I had a more enjoyable time reading it. But I will say it's not my favorite Becky Chambers. But I was surprised that actually the story structure it chose to go to worked for me. And I really like the science aspect of it, where it's like humans adapt themselves to like the different planets and all of that. So I thought that was really cool.
For me, this was actually my first Becky Chambers novel, and it's now that I've read the Wayfarer series now, but I hadn't when I read this. So I didn't really, having read the rest of her books now, I guess I would say, I understand better what it is she does, that she does this like slice of life in space thing. That's far more interested in the characters that she's talking about than it is in like delivering a plot, right? And that's fine, but I wasn't expecting that going into this, just because I wasn't very familiar with it. So I did really like it. It had multiple like moments and scenes that I felt were really beautiful. It did some incredible things with like just describing what it is to be human and what that might mean on a broader scale as like how we fit into the universe, which I loved. It said some really wonderful things about life and how life thrives despite various circumstances, and that was really cool. And I did really like the open ending. I guess for me, I like this more in retrospect than I liked it at the time that I read it.
I enjoyed the idea of this book. I enjoyed the overall story, and I think that the part about this book that I liked the most would be the descriptions of the different environments and the different things the different roles that everybody played, working together as a team. And I liked the science bit of it. So I enjoyed those aspects of it, but I couldn't get past the lack of character development, or at least the uneven character development. And there was one part in the story, I won't give a spoiler, but if you've read it, I hope you know what I'm talking about. It's at one point in the story, the crew learns about something that's happened back on Earth that personally impacts one of the members of that crew. And we get this like moment of sadness that's then followed really quickly by exhilaration of a discovery on the planet. And I don't know if that gives you enough detail to know what I'm talking about, but I remember sitting there and thinking, wow, this was an opportunity to actually explore grief and grief from a particular community. And the author deliberately chose not to do that, and then spent a couple of pages talking about like these cool aliens that were found. And I just, it felt to me like a really deliberate act of erasure and another missed opportunity to really get into some of the relationships that she could have. I also looked at and had a problem with the fact that the emotional needs of the crew like weren't evenly met. So there were some members of the crew who had like lovers and companionship, a backstory, and then others that were just sort of stereotypical, stereotypical characters that did things without very much motivation, and those things could have been explored. I didn't mind the open ending. I actually found it intriguing, but I think that for me, I found myself thinking, okay, looking at each of the characters and where they're from and what their beliefs are and what we've been told about them, how would they have been impacted by the ending? And I think that there were some characters on the crew who were served by that ending more than others. And so the ending then it made it less believable from my vantage point. So overall, I didn't like it. I mean, I didn't hate it as much as the test, but I found it very difficult to get through, even though there were very redeeming qualities when it comes to description and world building and that sense of adventure and wonder that really were consistent throughout the story.
Yeah, this was also my first Becky Chambers. I still haven't read any more of her work, but I definitely want to. But I knew going into it, it was kind of going to be like a slice of life, character-focused kind of story. Like that's her style. And that doesn't always work for me, but it worked for me in this one. I really liked it. I do have a science background, so like a biology background, so I really enjoyed that aspect of the story. And I saw someone in the chat mention it, but the like do no harm type of approach to studying wildlife, I thought was really interesting. And it wasn't really something I had thought too much about before, but I really liked that. And so I like that the story kind of explores like the ethics of science and how to do science ethically. So that's something that really appealed to me. I liked all the characters, and I was a little nervous about the ending because I had heard mixed, like, you know, that some people liked it and some people didn't. I'm usually not a huge fan of open endings either, but I was okay with this one. I'm not sure if it really, I know some people didn't like the ending because they didn't think it was realistic based on what we knew about the characters. And I think that in some ways I would agree with that, but I almost saw the ending as Becky Chambers posing a question to the reader and what we would do in that situation. And I really liked thinking about that. And so the ending actually worked for me, even though I wasn't sure if it was going to.
Very interesting. Cool. So those are our 3 books for the short fiction. So you've kind of got an idea of what each of the judges thinks. But what we normally do is we just do a little vote. And then if it's a split situation at the end of the judge vote, which it could be because we have 4 judges, then they're going to have to convince one of the judges to change their mind. So we get consensus. So I'll just run through. And if you could literally just tell me the one that you want to win in this category, we'll see what happens. So, Claire, what is your vote for short fiction?
My vote is To Be Taught If Fortunate.
Okay. Lee?
Mine is This Is How You Lose the Time War.
Okay, split. Like it. Builds up the suspense. Najiri?
This Is How You Lose the Time War.
Okay, Jade?
The Test. But at least there's not a tie, right?
Yeah, it's not a tie, so that's great news. But it means that this is how you lose the time war. The winner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This judges vote. Of course, you guys have been voting on the popular vote, which hopefully we've got some results for. I'm going to add Bree to the stream, who has the popular vote results. So let's bring her in. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, I think you need to unmute.
You're
or is
muted,
it just
I was on mute. Hello. I have the popular vote results, and the winner is pretty close. It goes to Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers, followed closely by This Is How You Lose the Time War.
Oh, okay. Exciting stuff. So thank you all for voting on that one, and we'll put out some announcement tweets at the end of this about who all the winners were, just to remind everyone once we get through all of them. And we're gonna, with that, try and move on to the next category, which means a bit of a judge shuffle around. So thank you to all these judges for judging in this category. We're gonna
Sorry
go on
for
to the
taking
middle.
way too long.
It's all right. I did tell them 10 minutes. It's not quite working, but we'll try and speed things up as we go forward. So we'll move on to middle grade, and I'll try and swap all the judges around. One of our judges is currently missing, so we might be a judge down for this category, but we will power on. So sorry, I'm just going to remove some of you from this stream. Say bye for now. Here we go. I think it's just you guys, is it? Am I? Oh no, I've removed the wrong people. Here we go. To add this is technical difficulties. Najiri, you're not in this one, are you?
I'm not, no.
Okay, there we go. It's you guys that I need on the screen. I think Just's having a little bit of internet trouble. Hopefully that's working out now. You good?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Can't hear me?
I can.
Oh, okay. Great.
Cool. So I think it's just going to be you guys for this one. So I'll just put up the book on the screen. Shall we start off? Actually, you've got 4 in this one because middle grade is a big category. So yeah, let's go for Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab first. And Just, do you want to go for it and tell us your thoughts on this one?
Cool. My thoughts are that Victoria Schwab is not getting better for me. I read this book pretty soon after reading the first book in the middle grade trilogy. I think it's a trilogy, right? Whatever, the first book in this series. And I found it was repetitive. It didn't make a lot of sense. And this was even like a month before J.K. Rowling showed her ass again. And I was already annoyed at the amount of Harry Potter references. I can't even imagine reading it now. I give it 2 stars.
Okay, nice, short and sweet. I like that. Lee.
So I feel very much the same about Victoria Schwab. I'm always so annoyed with her books because I feel like she has good ideas and then she doesn't execute on them the way that I want her to. So it doesn't matter what I'm reading of hers. I'm always annoyed that it's not as good as I wish it was. And I felt very much the same about this series. It turns out that actually her middle grade books are my favorite because I don't know, maybe my expectations are lower or different in some way. But I also read these one right after the other. I read City of Ghosts and then immediately read Tunnel of Bones and felt like I read the same story twice. And it didn't work well for me. It was fine, but I didn't like it.
Fair enough.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's fairly conclusive then. I haven't read this, but I've read other Victoria Schwab, and if it's anything like the others, I can imagine. So let's go straight on to Dragonfell by Yoon Lee then. Dive in as you will.
Do you want to go first this time? Oh, sure. I really, really liked Dragon Pearl. I thought it was awesome. I loved the the combination. It felt like a science fantasy in that it had a lot of like the Korean mythology elements pulled into this science fiction story. I liked it. I liked that we had this young girl who was going after her missing brother who set out into space. I liked the adventure story elements of it. It worked really well for me. I had a good time with this one.
Cool. Just
didn't love it as much as Yoon Lee's, but that said, this was a good science fiction. I always enjoy the way he writes science fiction and writes his characters and does really interesting things with just like gender and sexuality things. I thought it was good. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. I think I did too.
Nice, middle of the road then. Nice, good reads. Dead Voices by Katherine Arden. Just, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah. I'm a big horror fan, and I really love the way that Katherine Arden writes horror. I just like her writing in general, though. The Winter Night trilogy is like my favorite trilogy. I guess I've read the adult works of all of the people in this category, actually. So I'm like comparing their adult and middle grade. But I thought this was really fun. I liked the way she expanded on her characters from the first book.
I really appreciate that we get to follow Coco, who is just this very feminine girl, because the main character from the first book, Ollie, is a little less in touch with that side. So I like that there's like different ways of like being a girl sort of conversations happening. It was spooky. I like that the winter season is a little bit different. It just, her stuff works for me. I really did enjoy this one.
Good to know. Lee?
One of the things that I personally love about Katherine Arden is that I feel like her writing always gives me such a good sense of place. Like her settings are incredible and they feel very much like you're in the middle of them. So I read Dead Voices, which is a book about like a haunted mountain lodge, while I happened to be on a winter weekend vacation with my family where we had rented out a mountain lodge. And I'm a huge weenie already. Like I get scared easy. So like middle grade horror is about as horrific as I can handle. And then we were staying in a mountain lodge while I was reading this book in the wintertime. And so that was just an extra like layer of intensity that I was not expecting, that certainly really made the experience of reading this for me. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought that she did a fantastic job. I loved that we got to see some more of Coco in this. The scary elements of it, I felt like were really scary. Like they played right into things that I vividly remember being afraid of in my childhood. So it hit really well for me. I really enjoyed this.
Ooh, sounds pretty promising. I'm actually a big fan of Katherine Arden's adult stuff, so I was quite intrigued about this one as well, because I haven't read it, but you've made me more interested. And then the last one in this category was Sal and Gabi Break the Universe. So, Lee, do you want
me to start on this one?
Yeah, go.
I loved this. I loved this with my whole heart and soul. My favorite middle grade books are the ones that remind me what I love about being human, about being alive. And I feel like Sal and Gabi did that so well. The story was really fun. It was very like energetic and playful, but it also had these incredible things to say about the power of friendship, about family and found family. I loved it so much. Far and away, this was my favorite. That is no surprise. It was incredible. I loved it. I loved every element of it. I thought it was amazing.
That's good. Joss is clearly having internet issues, so
so I guess I get to pick the winner. Oh, all right.
You might have to pick the winner. Oh no, it's okay. Joss, you've returned. Go for it. What are your thoughts?
This was my favorite as well. This one, I've read this book twice. I read it twice last year, and it brings me so much joy. I talk about it all the time, and I talk a lot on my channel about Cuban American representation, especially because like that's very personal to me as a Cuban American person. And I just love the way Carlos Hernandez writes this. It's such a joyful book series. Like the second book made me cry the entire time, but like the first book is also so beautiful. I mentioned I think earlier this year that this
I think we might be having some more technical difficulties.
The closest thing that I've read to like the niche genre hope punk, like it's very just like a bright light and like everything can...
It's a bit tricky. I think she was saying about hope punk, which is a fairly niche genre, but definitely one that is probably worth reading in this time where everyone's a little bit up in the air. So that sounds like it's been a very good read for both of you. And I'm pretty sure we got Joss's vote there from us saying it was the favourite. So we can probably assume what the winner of this is going to be for the judges' vote. Oh,
I think vanished. So. For me, it's definitely Sal and Gabi.
I think we got Joss's vote just before she vanished. Oh, she's coming back. Hang on. Here we go. Let's try this again. So I think you're back. Hopefully. maybe not. Okay, well, we'll just assume for now. If we can get Just back in, we will later on. But hopefully, she agrees that Sal and Gabi is her vote, and we'll assume that's what the judges did. I'll keep trying to add her back. We'll also get Bri in to tell us what the popular vote was, because we haven't yet found that one out. So, hi Bri, I think you might be on mute again.
Which is hilarious.
And I think we've got Just back as well. Just, what's your vote for Sal and Gabi?
Oh, Sal and Gabi's my favorite.
Excellent.
Can you hear me? Is this working? I don't even know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, in perhaps the least surprising results for the BookTube SFF Awards, Sal and Gabi did take the popular vote as well.
Excellent news. Well, that sounds like it was a general consensus in the comments as well. A lot of people saying that they really, really enjoyed it. So might be one everyone should check out if you haven't read the middle grade section. Might be one worth reading. So thank you guys for judging in this section, and we'll do another switch around to move on to the next one, which is going to be YA. So let me just figure out who I'm adding back in. And thanks to all the judges who just did their part. So I need Jade. Gavin's not here, and Noria. I think this is the right people. I can remove you for now, Bri. Oh no, are you judging? Sorry, it's all me.
It's okay.
Technical stuff. I've got a list which is like a scribbled notepad of who should be on what, and it's very confusing, so please bear with me. But I think this is right. So yeah, we're missing Gavin, but we've got 3 judges. So let's go for the YA category. First one, The Wicked King by Holly Black. Who wants to dive in first with this one? Jade, I think you might be muted, potentially.
Yeah. Yes. I was just saying
Should
I
have
can go
made
first.
bingo cards.
So I wasn't sure what I was going to think of this going in. I have read Holly Black before, and I've enjoyed some of her other stuff, even though that stuff people have mixed opinions on. So I thought there was a good chance I would like it. But I also, this series has a really big fandom and a lot of people have talked about it. So I was kind of familiar with the romance relationship, like who is in a romance, and that it's kind of like a hate to love sort of thing. And hate to love is not usually my favorite trope. Like it doesn't always work for me. I just have a hard time believing it a lot of the time. And so I was very hesitant going into the series because I thought that would be a big turnoff. But it ended up being a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of it was very adventure-y and just fun, and I liked it.
Great. Noria?
Okay. Should I go next?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's funny because I finished 2 books on this list, and I didn't finish 2. So I'm just putting it out there. Confession time. I was about to. Don't lie, Noria. Just tell the truth. Okay. So I did finish The Wicked King. I happen to be one of people. Okay. I think my internet just disappeared. Can you all hear me? Am I back?
Yeah.
Because I'm frozen.
Just dancing on the stream.
Can you all hear me? My internet does this. Okay. Do you know, I can hear you, so I think I'm back. Okay. So I am one of the people that love the series, and I love this book. I think a lot of times when people look at the Folk of the Air series, which is the trilogy that The Wicked King belongs to, they always they go into it with the expectation of it's very heavy on the romance and it's hate to love. I don't really consider it a romance story because the romance takes secondary. It takes a backseat to the political maneuvering and courtly intrigue, and that is what I really love about the series. The fact that you don't know who you're trusting, you don't know who's going to backstab you next. You need to create alliances. You need to support and who will support you in turn. And I think of compared to the Crow Prince, the Wicked King had more of that going for it. There was a lot.
Totally agree.
It was more intelligent sense, because I could actually see them putting their brains and trying to figure things out and knowing that they don't have enough time. And the ending for me was also it out. But I would say I did. It's my favorite of the series. But like I said, I have a fondness for courtly maneuverings and manipulations and everything else. So I got that a lot with the Wicked King, which makes me very happy.
Great. Bree, anything to add on that one?
Sure. So I did have actually a pretty good time reading this, and full disclosure, I'm a sucker for enemies to lovers tropes. I love them. You'll get me with them every time. And I would agree that a lot of the political intrigue is perhaps the more interesting part of the book. I was really glad that in this book, the romance took a step back from the Cruel Prince. It just wasn't as much of an element, even though it was still present. And I found that compelling. So yeah, I think that that's kind of where I fall on it. This is not the series of Holly Blacks that I'm most familiar with. I'm actually most familiar with her Tithe series, which was coming out when I was in high school, so quite a while ago. But I had a good time. I don't know that I think that some of the craftsmanship couldn't have been a little bit more refined and sophisticated. Some of it is a little bit on the basic end, but not in an unpleasant way.
Great. Okay. Shall we move on to the next book for this one then? Let's dive into Starsight. Noria, is this one you read or didn't get to?
No, because I still have not finished Skyward. And I was just like, yo, I need to, and I bought it. And I bought the UK covers because I'm like, those are pretty. I started it because I love this concept of a girl that is trying to redeem her family's honor by going against a system that would rather punish her for the supposed sins of her father. Like, I love the concept, and I definitely would get into it, hopefully before the end of the year. But nope, I did not finish Starsight, so I'm going to sit this one out.
Fair enough. Okay. Jade, do you want to dive in?
Yeah. So I, full disclosure, tend to like Brandon Sanderson. So I knew going into it that there was a good chance that I would enjoy this series. And I like middle grade, but I don't read a lot of it. This isn't middle grade. That's actually one of my complaints about the series, is that it reads a little young for YA. I think it's probably like a really good crossover between YA and middle grade, at least in the beginning. I think that the main character, the beginning of the series, I think the main character has a lot of room for growth, which is really nice. But it was a lot of fun. I did enjoy the first book in the series more. I read these really close together. The second one was cool because you get a little more, I'm trying to not be too spoilery, but like you explore other places and you meet other characters and stuff. And I found that interesting, but I just kind of missed the characters and things from the first book. So I did like the first book a little bit more, but overall I did enjoy this one.
Cool.
Sure. So full disclosure, I actually err on the side of not really being a Sanderson fan, which I know is not always the popular opinion. So I do agree, though. I really like the idea of the book, of this girl who's being kind of going against a system where she's being punished for her father's supposed actions. In a lot of ways, I found that the writing was a little formulaic. And there was just a lot of room for character growth, but we didn't actually get a ton of character growth, was the way I kind of felt about it. Especially with our main character. She's just kind of still this highly wound, like everything she says is hyperbolic in a way that's almost kind of annoying. So this just wasn't my favorite one. I like the idea. It just, the execution wasn't how I would have preferred it.
I've actually read this one. This is one of the few that I have read because I'm also a pretty big Sanderson fan. So I think the interesting thing about this one, I'm not a judge, I'm just chipping in, sorry, is that it went in a completely different direction from where I thought it was going to go. Like the ending of book one sort of ends at one point and then book two comes in and it's like this complete veer off to where I was not expecting, which I
think that's why I didn't like it as much. Like,
it wasn't what I thought it would be. So yeah, it's a bit.
And I do agree that the main character is kind of annoying. That's one of my bigger complaints. But she grew on me by the end of the second one. I do see some growth in her personally, but I do think she still has a lot more to go. But it is a 4-book series, I think. So hopefully by the end of it.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see by the end of the series how he's kind of dealt with it, because in a way it feels like he's almost written himself into a corner with the political side of the story. So we will see.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, next one then. Sorcery of Thorns. Who wants to go for that one?
I am also sitting this one out because I started it because I have read Margaret Rogerson's An Enchantment of Ravens, which I love. And it was really short. It's a small book, but it packed a punch. And I started Sorcery of Thorns because he also had enemies to lovers, which is my kryptonite. So I'm like, okay. And I did enjoy the start. I don't know why. My mind just wandered. I think I'm just too used to our short stories and just being tossed into this sprawling world. I was just like, okay, this is not the Margaret I need or I know. But it's a Margaret I'll get back to, but I'm sitting this one out as well because I have not finished it. I'm like a quarter way in. So I can't in all honesty actually judge it accurately. So
fair enough. Bree, do you want to go first on this one then?
Sure. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really fun romp, and there were a lot of elements that I liked about it. Especially, I thought the main character was pretty compelling. It wasn't like a mind-blowing, like, oh my god, I needed to read this, but it was definitely a good time.
I really enjoyed this one. It was one of my top favorite books that I read last year. I had read An Enchantment of Ravens and I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it nearly as much as this one. This one like literally just gave me the warm fuzzies, and it just it feels like older YA, as in like YA that was written like 10, 15 years ago. And it just gave me a little bit of like nostalgic feels just from the feeling that I got from reading it. It's very wholesome, and it's like a good old adventure story with a little bit of romance, a little bit of magic, a little bit of political intrigue, and all of that was just like a really good mix for me. And it was really good. I liked it.
I do think that you're absolutely right that the balance of those elements is really good in the story.
I would state though that a surname like got to me because I use Scrivener, the app, and every time someone said Scrivener, I'm like, do you mean the app? I'm like, oh no, it's her name. It's just weird. I need to, when I ever see Margaret in real life, I'll be like, let me guess, you were using Scrivener. You're like, this will be funny. It's not funny. I was just like, why? So yeah, I just needed to keep that in.
Okay, let's go. Oh yeah, there is another one in this category. It's another 4-book category, isn't it? Okay, so let's go for this one, The Gilded Wolves. Who wants to dive in?
Because I've been going first in everything. I love this book. I love this book, but because one, I actually love heist stories, and although I do adore Six of Crows, and everybody says Six of Crows is the heist book, and so many people like to compare it, but I'm like, as much as I absolutely adore Six of Crows, it's one of my favorite series, there's not that much heist in that book. If you're really looking for a heist story, you don't get it as much in Six of Crows, but in The Gilded Wolves, you do. Because there's puzzles. There's trying to figure things out. You're like, oh my God, what does this mean? Can I puzzle this out before this character gives me a hint of what it is? And as someone who also plays video games, and I really, really love adventure, treasure hunting video games, I could see that element in it as well. And for Roshani, Chokshi to give me that, to give me a heist novel, to give me this treasure hunting feel like I'm watching a game unfold in real life, and also to bring in conversations about, what was going on in Paris at the time, the cultural implication, the racist undertones, and she touched on so many things, and it was such a layered story. I absolutely love this one. So yeah, I love Gilded Wolves. I loved it.
Either of you go for it. Whoever wants to.
Sure. Yeah, the heist elements of this were a lot of fun. And there was a really interesting conversation about what it means to be legitimate in your society that I thought was really engaging. Especially when it comes to like the main character and his counterpoint. There are these two men who are both kind of raised in the system, and one is rejected essentially because of his race and the other is embraced. And that was intriguing, especially watching the interpersonal dynamics between the two. Some of the story I think could have been a little simplified just to streamline it a little bit, but I do like those puzzle elements. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I felt pretty lukewarm about this. This was my first Roshani Trotsky. And I actually did get to hear her talk a little bit about this book, like right as I was starting it, because I went to a book festival that she was on a panel at. And she mentioned something about how it's a little bit inspired by, oh shoot, I'm going to forget the name.
The belly poke era?
No, the movie, there's a movie that's like a high...
Ocean's 11?
No, dang it. I'm totally forgetting the name of this movie. Anyways, and that really helped me to kind of put it in, I really agreed with her. Like I could see those similarities. I'm totally blanking on the name of the movie, whatever. So I was excited about the heist elements, but I actually found them to be really disappointing. I thought that the puzzles and stuff were too easily figured out. Like the characters would like come up with these ideas that were so random and abstract and pull these clues together that I like didn't find it quite believable. And there were a few things that like, this is, supposed to be set in historical Paris, which I found the setting really interesting, but there are a few things that like kind of pulled me out of the time. Just like some of the ways that the characters were talking were a little more modern. I remember one time they were mentioning zippers and I like Googled when zippers were invented because it didn't seem to like match. And there were just like a few like things like that were a little bit weird. And overall, I just found it a little bit campy. Like the humor in it isn't really my style. It reminded me also of a little bit of like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Indiana Jones, because it's a heist, but you're like kind of trying to find these historical artifacts and you have to like figure out these puzzles and things to be able to get to them. So it reminded me of Indiana Jones, also in like the humor aspect too. It's like a little bit kind of like campy humor, and that's just doesn't tend to work for me a lot of the time. So I felt like there were some interesting parts. I like the colonialism and the racism like things. I thought it was interesting, but it wasn't enough for me to really enjoy it because of the other things that I didn't like.
Like I love the fact that you mentioned, the colonialism part, because I did like the way she interpreted it, and we always state that, there was a lot of raiding of the indigenous communities that, the colonialists went to, and they always took something, and to have that taken be represented by an object of power and how it was moved to France, I found that very interesting. And I also think that, the fact that the conversation, which was, what you mentioned earlier, that there had to be a case of which of these two should be the heirs to their throne, to their houses. I like the fact that it's something that existed then and it's something that exists now. The fact that minorities, there has to be one minority to represent the other group. And then you have a larger group that is always very, very white and, in the majority, and then they just pick one person to represent everybody else and be like, oh, we filled the quota. And then, so how do they decide the quota, right? To decide between, they had to decide between Hypnos, and they had to decide between Hypnos and Severin. And then it was a case of how did they judge it? Because both boys are both biracial, right? But Severin was more white passing and Hypnos wasn't. And I guess the hypervisibility of him being other and being different was what went into them choosing him to represent his house. Because if we're going to pick a minority to fill this spot, everybody needs to know that, oh, we did a good thing. Here is this, you know, visibly black boy that is heading one of the house. Of course, we're going to put a lot of limitations to what he can do, because you're just there for the face, but you don't really have that much agency or control. I really did. I can talk a lot about this book. I enjoyed it, but I'm just gonna stop here. Yeah.
Also, I looked up the movie. I Googled it, and it was National Treasure, is what she said. Which I think makes a lot of sense.
Nicolas Cage. Yes.
That's what I Googled. I was like, I know he's in it.
Yes.
And also, I think Rhea said that the first commercial zippers were invented in the 1910s. And I think that's right, but the story takes place in like 1889. So I remember reading that. And I mean, it's close. Most people wouldn't know, but like it just seemed, I was like, wait, but when were zippers? Anyways, it doesn't matter.
Unless it was that, because if it's commercial and if we follow the way fashion evolves in present day, you always have the select group have it way before, and then they cascade it to the masses. So if commercially it was invented in 1910, it probably came out before then, but only the elite of society were probably using it because, you know, the rich does not really care about the poor until they're like, okay, we have no choice here, take this thing. So I think that maybe that's how she justified it.
Yeah.
Maybe. I was not paying as much attention. Admittedly, when I was working on a garden project and listening to the book, so I was also like drilling pieces of wood together, and so maybe it didn't click in my head that the zipper thing was not quite right.
Cool. So those are all of the books in this category. So hopefully we can come to a consensus on a winner. Let's just run through and tell me which one you're voting for as a judge.
My favorite was Sorcery of Thorns.
Okay, one vote for Sorcery of Thorns.
I really liked Sorcery of Thorns, but I think I'd probably go with the Gilded Wolves.
Okay, this is good. It means Nori, you get a vote because neither of those are the ones you have.
Of course, it's the Gilded Wolves. I absolutely adore that book.
The Gilded Wolves.
I'll have to do it. Which is sad because people be like, "Yo, you love the Wicked King." I'm like, yes, but I love the Gilded Wolves. Just
despite the
go with the
zipper,
Gilded Wolves.
we're okay.
Should I reveal the popular vote?
Yes. Tell us what the popular vote was.
Okay, the popular vote was actually very close between Starsight and Sorcery of Thorns, with Sorcery of Thorns just taking the vote.
Ooh,
Yay.
bit of a different one there then. Most of the popular votes so far have kind of agreed with our judges, but got a different opinion on this one. Not that surprising to me because I do think Sanderson is very well loved in our booktube community, so I kind of anticipate him being up there when he's on the shortlist. So cool. Thank you guys for doing this YA category. We're gonna now move on to debut. Let me check my notes. Who's on this one? So we'll say goodbye to some more judges for now, and then we'll swap some more in. So you guys are heading out, and then who's coming in? Thomas. Let's join Thomas and Joss. I think that's everyone for this category. Fingers crossed. So on to debut, which is luckily just a 3-booker and actually doubles up a lot with our other categories, like the adult categories, weirdly this year, which I think is a good thing, like seeing debuts being like the best of their category as well. I'm quite pleased about that. but it just means that we had less to read, which is fine with me. Always good when it's a long one. So let's just dive straight in, shall we? So I think, yeah, all of us are judges on this one, including me. So debut, A Memory Called Empire. Who would like to dive in with that one? Bree? Maybe?
I loved it. I loved it so much. I loved the political intrigue. I loved the way that the main character is challenged to come to terms with the fact that even though she loves a culture and is, you know, an ambassador to this culture, that she'll never truly be part of it. I love the way it grapples with identity and who are you if your memories are coming from somebody other than just you. What does that mean for you as a person? And what does that mean for this like long-term entity in your head kind of thing? Hands down, it was one of my favorite reads of the whole year.
Great. Thomas or Joss?
Go ahead, Joss.
This is my pick. I also really enjoyed this. Yeah, the way it talks about culture, the way it talks about colonization and like being in love with this other like bigger thing that's actually actively harming your own culture, but still loving it. I think it was really smartly written. I think it's very entertaining, and it was great.
Great. Thomas?
Yeah, I guess I just, don't really have anything much to add to the gushing here, other than I'll just sort of like gush in tandem with the previous gushing so that we have a big gush fountain. It was beautiful. It really is just everything I seek, is not just in a space opera, but in, again, this story of, empires and and particularly Mahit's own, again, her own sense of, it could have been so easy to make this story simplistic in terms of, evil empire and, the poor oppressed and what have you. And making Mahit someone who has this actual real love for, the culture of this empire, and just a fondness for their poetry and their art and everything else. And yet still balancing that, with her loyalty to, her station background. And then, of course, there are all these hints of things going on just kind of at the edges. It's just so layered and so rich and so lovely. And it's just, it's beautiful. This is like one of those rare debut novels that just kind of seems to emerge fully formed. So, yep.
Cool. So I'm going to be the controversial one here and go, it's not my favorite in this category. But I think a lot of that might come from the fact that I'm far more of a fantasy reader and you guys tend to be more sci-fi than I am, nope. Which I think this is true, not you, but the other two. I think for me, it was lacking the emotion side of it. Like I really found it hard to connect at all with the character. All the stuff you guys have said, I completely agree with. I think that was all so true. But for me as a reader, I like to connect with the character, and I found it really hard to do that with this main character. So I liked it in the end. I did give it like 3.5, I think. And I think for a debut, I would definitely read more by this author and like continue the series. But it wasn't my favorite of the ones in this category, which I think was a strong category anyway, to be fair. So yeah, let's go on to the next one. Gideon the Ninth. Let's dive into that. Who wants to go first on this one?
I was
I'll go.
sold.
Oh,
sorry.
No, go for it.
I'll go last on the
Okay.
I will say I was sold on the pitch of lesbian necromancers in space real quickly, but go ahead, Joss.
I was sold on the pitch. I do not believe the pitch delivered me that. It felt like a mystery. It felt like a very messy mystery. And part of that for me, it was like a very personal thing. I think I wrote this in my review. The most polarizing thing, I think, really is the tone of voice. And like, I don't think it's funny. And it's trying to be funny. Like, if you don't get that humor, I don't like it. Like it wasn't funny to me, and that's like 80% of what the book's going for. So I was like, eh.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a curious book because on the one hand, you can't really dismiss it. It's something where it's very obvious Tamsin Muir is put an incredible amount of work into sort of realizing this book. But when you get right down to it, what you have is this very long and involved story that really just sort of rests on two things. You have, again, the banter between the characters, which I do kind of agree with Joss. Sometimes it's witty, but other times it just feels kind of try-hardy. And then you have the world. So you've got the banter and then the world, which she's kind of expecting to do all of the book's heavy lifting. And the world, when you get right down to it, doesn't really. There's not actual world building so much as for example, in terms of here's how the world works and here are the rules and they make sense. You don't really get that in this. There's this. These characters are training to become the new. The lictor, kind of like the adjutant of the emperor, because there's this interstellar war that we're not really told anything at all about until you get to the second book, Harrow the Ninth. And so what you get instead of actual world building is just this dedication to an aesthetic, which is a cool aesthetic, right? It's like, okay, got it. Everybody's like, gothy and amazingly well dressed, and they have these long, sexy, aristocratic names. But that's really it. Yeah, and again, this huge panoply of characters. You have like the 9, candidates for lictor, and then each one of them has their champion, and then there's some others. So there are at least like 20 or so characters with dialogue, and very few of them are distinctive from one another. And then the one, and then of course there's the one character where it's just like written on her face. It's just like so completely obvious, like there is more to me than meets the eye throughout the entire book, right? So there was no real surprise there for me, but at the same time I couldn't really dismiss it, and so it felt like this kind of lengthy slog towards a payoff that was admittedly cool. Like there was a big production at the climax. And you're like, all right, well, that was exciting. That was kind of worth it. But I still kind of felt like, a bit more substance, a little less style, and you could have had it. It could have been a great book. And yes, I do agree that the whole lesbian necromancers in space thing was oversold because, I mean, you can imagine it was like the public. They're saying, well, what the hell how do we sell this? Because it's like if we try to go with the plot, it's going to make no sense. Well, they seem like they're kind of gay for each other, so we'll just go with that, right? And then they kind of tried to make that the hook, and as you say, the hook didn't really deliver. It's like barely until the last scene you kind of get this, finally like the enemies to lovers thing kind of resolves, but it's hardly the focus of the story. So,
I think though in a lot of ways it's not actually supposed to be the focus of the story. I think a lot of the story is supposed to be about that like mystery and figuring out what's going on, because clearly the structure behind it has been deceptive.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I was saying was like the promotional push,
the promotional push was a little heavy-handed on that.
And
I do agree with you about. I think that there were more characters than there needed to be, and it became at times hard to track.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
I'd be very interested to see to listen to the execution of it on audiobook.
It was a mess.
Was it?
Yeah. I audioed it, and I think that was a mistake in hindsight because, like, I read a lot of fantasy with a lot of long names, but even on audio, I was just like, I don't really know who's who except for the one little real bit of their name that's different that I was listening to, and I was like, I do know. Yeah, I kind of agree with all of you on this one. It was fun. Like, I enjoyed bits of it. I did not love the crude language. I thought it was excessively, like, too much at points to try and make you laugh. And I was like, I'm not getting the humor coming through that often. So yeah, I agree with what everyone else has said. And I do think that the lack of surprise at the end was just a bit like, here it is, you know?
Yeah. So, okay, but the ending, like I still felt like it had, so I know the ending was not surprising. I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
I still had the emotional reaction to the ending that
I
Muir
think
wanted.
it
And I
has
thought
that,
that
it delivered as this big kind of action set piece that was satisfying and that did kind of bring the relationship between, you know, Harrow and Gideon to this kind of, you know, like a real climax. But it felt like it was a long time coming.
Yeah, it's a slow build up.
And following, you know, what there is of a plot also, you know, felt really video gamey to me too. If you like peel away all of the rococo and the, you know, all of the dressing of it, you know, what did you have? Well, you have, you know, the characters who are in this kind of elaborate palace structure, and they're trying to get from level to level to level, and so they have to like do the thing that allows and fight the mini boss that allows them to get through the door to get to the next bit. And they even have the one room, the death trap room, where like Gideon has to like get from one end to the back to, you know, activate the thing and not die. And it kind of felt video gamey at times in terms of how the story was unspooling. So.
Sure, I could see that. I don't know that I think that that's a knock against it, but that's just, I think it's more of a taste thing about how you like the story.
I definitely feel like this book is one that you're gonna like or not like, probably based on what your taste is with this style of writing, because it very much feels like it's sticking hardcore to the things it wants to emphasize, and if you don't like those, you're probably not going to love it, but if you do, then you're going to love it. I think a few people in the comments are saying they really enjoyed it, and a few are saying, like us, that maybe not. So
I'll give it this: there's nothing else right now on the SFF racks like it.
That's true.
You know, it is distinctive. It is one where I appreciate it for what she was attempting more than I can say I actually enjoyed it. You know, I admire it more than I enjoy it. Yeah.
I do think it was, I enjoyed reading it. I thought the atmosphere was compelling, and like in my head, I could build out what the rooms and envision it. And that is a skill, and that is not just like a thing that happens in your books. And I really appreciate that she's incredibly vivid.
That's true. Okay, let's go on to the next one in this category then. The 10,000 Doors of January. Shall I dive in with this one? Why not?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one for me was a bit of a slow starter, but it built up the more you go through it. And I think I wasn't sure I was going to love it when I started it, but I think as the story goes on and the characters' stories all kind of start layering up, because there's a couple different storylines that are being pulled together here, with like the past storyline and then January's storyline. And I think January's quite easy to connect with straight away, but the past storyline took me a little while to sort of figure out how it was woven into this one. I kind of got vibes of like the Wayward Children series by Sean Ann Maguire when I was reading this. I felt like it was a similar kind of idea, but obviously this is a novel length, that's novella. But it kind of reminded me of that. I liked it in the end much more than I thought I would, and I felt like it really built up as I went on, but it was slow. Like I didn't connect with it straight away. So it was more surprising to me that I liked it in the end. It's definitely like magical realism, portal fantasy kind of combo. So if you like that, you'll probably like this in general, I think. What did you guys think?
Bree?
I have no poker face. I've never had a poker face.
Okay.
So I think it was beautifully written. I think the prose is gorgeous. I'm not sure that the story itself is executed in a way that is, one, kind of easy to digest, and two, that really actually actively explores the kind of family pain and trauma that it sets up, and instead pushes a lot of that story off onto kind of this idea of like cycles, but without actually following through, if that makes sense. And I was not really a big fan of a lot of of what's her name? What's the character who's the girl who's from the Midwest? Not January, the other woman.
Edith?
Edith, I think. No, that's not right.
No, that's not.
Yeah, because the story essentially follows three characters: January, mysterious girl, and mysterious guy.
Yeah. And Adelaide's the character.
Adelaide, yeah.
Adelaide, that was it.
In the book, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought Adelaide, her story didn't quite sit well with me, and it kind of had a little bit of that, like, this is going to maybe seem a little controversial or inarticulate perhaps, but it had a little bit of that, like, vibe of, like, white lady goes on an adventure and doesn't actually have to engage with a lot of the actual dangers or trauma because she is white lady, and that doesn't sit well with me.
That's fair.
So that's my thoughts.
Fair comment. Joss, did you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah. I thought the writing was very lush. I agree with the Wayward Children vibes of the whole thing. I think that this white woman maybe picked off a little bit too much to chew in terms of making her character biracial. I've heard a lot of other reviewers talk about they don't like the way that she is described. I listened to the audiobook, so it washed over me a little bit more, but I think people have mentioned that, like, she sometimes, like, describes herself as, like, a half-breed, which is not a cute thing to say. So I think she sets up to deal with a lot of things and doesn't really fulfill that as much as she needs to. That said, the idea was nice, and, like, the way that sentences were crafted, it was very rhythmic, and, like, the sentences sound very lovely. But, like, I think when you look at the substance, I was a little unimpressed on that level.
Fair enough. Cool. Okay, so those are the three that we have. Let's see if we can come to a consensus, although I have a good feeling that we might.
I mostly agree with Bree and Joss on this one too.
Then that's it, because you're the majority. So
well, I mean, it just sort of I usually am like, oh God, you know, when I see like a nested narrative is coming up in a book, I'm like, can we get pulled aside? And that actually turned out to be fairly well handled. But I agree very much with Joss. There were things, and I'm sort of not, I don't have the same frame of reference, obviously, but there were things about the way that Alex Harrow was writing January that occasionally made me be like, you know, like it just sounded not 100% to me, but you know, but of course it didn't necessarily hit me as much as it would have, you know, the other reviewers that you mentioned, and so to kind of hear that is interesting. But on the whole, yeah, in terms of the writing and the prose, and I thought it was quite, you know, pretty to read, and I did not dislike it, but at the same time, I agree with all of you guys in that I don't think it succeeds absolutely all that it's trying to do. So.
Cool. Okay, so let's do our judges' vote then. So out of A Memory Called Empire, Gideon the Ninth, or 10,000 Doors of January, what would you like to win the judges' vote? Although I have a solid guess on this one. G, what do we think? Would it by any chance be A Memory Called Empire?
I'm gonna go yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
A conclusive yes then. So Memory Called Empire was the judge vote, and what was the popular vote?
The popular vote was by a landslide also A Memory Called Empire.
I think of all of them, it does the most interesting things. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Cool. Okay, so moving swiftly on, Best SF, which has a few more people. Let me do a swap around, and we'll be back with the Best SF. So let's see. Lee is coming in, and Claire is coming in. Where is Claire? There she is. And who else?
Most people we've had on screen in a while.
Yeah. Joss is going. Jade is coming in. Am I on the right number? Yes, I am. I think that's it. Cool. Good stuff. Let's switch over to the SF banners. So we had how many books in this? We had 3 books. Actually, 2 of them we've just talked about, so it might be worth us letting the judges who were not on the previous one kind of give their views on the 2 books that we've just discussed. So Gideon the Ninth and the other one.
Memory Called Empire.
Memory Called Empire had a complete mind blank. The one that just won.
The one that just won.
yeah, I forgot that one. So let's dive into A Memory Called Empire then. Anyone who was not on screen just now, go for it and tell us what you thought of it, whether you agreed.
Okay, I can go. So I'm a bit of an unpopular opinion, and I didn't dislike the book, but I didn't enjoy it that much. It was just, I felt pretty lukewarm about it. There were things about it that I really liked. The exploring, like, I always love books that explore memories and how memories make us who we are and how our experiences form who we are. So that part of it, especially with like the technology piece, I really enjoyed. But honestly, I found like the politics and the culture really hard to grasp. It took me a long time to kind of grasp it. Granted, I did kind of read this during a point in my life where I was kind of going through some stuff. So that might have been part of it, but there's a lot of like foreign words or like made up words that, and I didn't realize there was a glossary until I was like halfway through, that I just had a really hard time grasping. So some of the cultural stuff, while I found was interesting, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was going on, and that kind of impeded on my enjoyment of it. But I did really enjoy the last quarter of it. I thought things kind of pulled together really well at the end. And I enjoyed the ending, but I'm not sure if I'm going to continue on in the series. But I am still interested in reading more of this author's work in the future. I just think maybe the series might not be for me. It's a dog with a squeaky toy.
Fair enough.
We needed more dogs in our lives, just always. So
now we've got to see the doggy. No fair.
Pets on the live stream is always allowed.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if I have to talk intelligently whilst there is a puppy, I don't know. Anyway, book good.
I think we have our winner sitting right there. Win all the awards.
The winner of the SF category is the dog.
Yeah.
Toby. He's about 2.5, 3 months old.
Oh, adorable.
All right, sorry to distract you.
Okay,
well, 14 out of 10 for the dog.
Yes, we've all had our dog fixed. Thank you.
So I really enjoyed A Memory Called Empire. I don't usually mind like a fairly steep learning curve in a book where it's just like, here, have a bunch of weird words and concepts. I find that frustrating if the author's not doing a good job of like, you know, I find that frustrating if it's not if it isn't well written. But in that case, I thought it was very well written, and so I just kind of like, yeah, I'll get it at some point, you know. And then I did. So I thought it worked really well. I thought they kind of like the resolution at the end of it was interesting. I thought like the ways in which it. I mean, I'm quite interested in stuff like language and memory, which obviously are key things in this book. So I thought it was doing a really interesting thing. I like political intrigue. I like the idea of, you know, cultures that are quite different and seeing different points of view. I thought the stuff that it has to say about like colonization and stuff is really interesting. You know, as an immigrant and an Anglophile, obviously I don't come from a country that was oppressed by England, so it's a very different kind of take, you know. But it was still really interesting as somebody who, like, you know, immigrated because this culture was so enjoyable to me, you know, with its many flaws. I thought that was really intriguing, and I felt, you know, that gave me feelings. And I thought there was stuff about the way that the whole thing resolved without giving any spoilers, in fact. I just thought that there were things about it that were interesting and surprised me. I'm really glad that there's going to be future books, and I'm definitely going to read them. But like the way the book ended and the choices that Mahit makes at the end of the book, I thought were like a bit surprising. Like not, in many ways, this book feels like, when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, that has ancillary justice vibes, and I'm really excited about that. But as much as it did feel like it was in continuation with this kind of tradition, it also did a lot of fresh new stuff, and I really loved it.
Great.
I think it's a duology.
Oh, is it just two? Okay, well, I mean, Desolation Called Empire is out in 2021, I'm fairly sure.
Sweet.
Yeah, a Desolation Called Peace.
Oh, of course, because Empire is the first book. My bad.
Yeah. As far as I know, it's a duology. Could end up being.
If it's just a duology, I might actually read the next one, because I was intrigued by the way it ended, and I feel like the direction the story is taking at the end is what I was more interested in, and we were only getting hints of that in the middle of the book, and I wanted kind of like more of that plot. And another thing that I didn't mention is that this book also has a bit of like, I don't know, I felt a little bit of a mystery element, like not as much as Gideon the Ninth, but a little bit of that too, like a murder mystery thing. And I thought that was interesting that we had two books that had that.
For me, I don't have a ton to add to this except to tell you all that I am a Memory Called Empire super fan. Like, I finished this book, fell head over heels in love with it. I have reread it twice since then. This is the book that I have recommended to the most people this year. Like, my dad read it, my siblings are reading it, all of my friends, I'm like, you must read this book. I love it. Like, I got on the internet and I found my Takes Kalan name, and like, I am such a whore for this book. I love it so much. We don't have enough time for me to adequately express how much I love this book. I love the political intrigue. I loved that like all of the characters have their own motivations, and they're all after something of their own. So there's that element of like, who can you trust? And it changes from situation to situation. Loved this. Oh my gosh, it was so good.
That's
awesome.
That's so great. I guess we'll have to see if any of the other books can crush your love for this in this category. But maybe not. Let's go on to Gideon the Ninth, which again, you guys should probably chip on this because we kind of said our piece. So Jade, do you want to chime in?
Sure. Yeah. And again, I guess I'm not necessarily an unpopular opinion amongst you guys, but compared to like the wider world, I feel like I've heard a lot of really good things about it, and I just felt kind of lukewarm about it. Once again, I found things to be a little more confusing and convoluted that I needed to, or that I would have liked. The murder mystery kind of came out of left field and was not what I was expecting when it came to like a competition setting sort of thing. Like the competition setting didn't really pull through for me. There were way too many characters with too many names. I also did a lot of audiobook for this, which I thought the narrator was pretty good, but it was quite confusing. I did have a physical copy and I was really grateful because I referred to that character list all the time. But it's like there's a lot of characters and they all have multiple names and they're used kind of like interchangeably. And like Thomas said, they weren't very distinct characters. So I just had a really hard time keeping track of everything. And yeah, the lesbians in space thing was a bit like not accurate. And there was also things like why are they using swords and rapiers, but they have spaceships and like not guns? And I don't know, just like the world building was a little bit weird. I get why people like it. It is unique. It's different. It has a very different aesthetic that I can see appeals to a lot of people, but it doesn't appeal to me that much. And also I didn't like the humor. So there were things I found interesting. I know I said a lot of really negative things, but I just felt pretty lukewarm about it.
No, fair enough. Claire?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this book is that Tor is very good at marketing insofar as they're very good at selling you books and at making you want to buy books. But if your marketing is misleading, then you end up with a problem, right? Because all of us who bought the book because they were like, oh my God, a romp in space, lesbian necromancers. And it's like, I think it's a very good book, and I think it's a very interesting story, but I think it's just not that story that the marketing was telling us it was gonna be. And I think if you're gonna tell like complicated, tragic stories, and particularly explore like dark theme and queer characters and kind of like histories of trauma and stuff like that, like, you know, it's just, these stories are really, really important, but you can't just like go about saying like it's a fun adventure book, and then when everybody reads it, it's like, this is not really what it is. Like, I think it's, I really love the like aesthetic of it. Like, for me, like I said, I don't mind if something doesn't like immediately make sense at first. Like, as a reader, I find it very easy to like, you know, I'll just see if I figure it out and then give it a little while, and then usually it's fine. And in this case, for me, it was fine. I found the characters fairly like distinct. I found the world building really, really good. Like, I'm not sure that, you know, I'm not sure that it was necessarily like, it's not my favorite type of story, but then it wasn't necessarily for me, you know? So, sorry, I feel like I'm extremely inarticulate. I think it did a lot of things really, really well. I think it was very distinctive, and I think it accomplished what it wanted to do very well, which I think is the difference between, you know, when you read a thing and it doesn't work for you, but it succeeds in what it's trying to achieve as a narrative. I think that's a really important distinction. And, you know, for me, I really liked it. I didn't think there was any problems in like the writing of it and me reading it and understanding it and the characters and all of that. I liked that it had this really like kind of dramatic epic fantasy tone to it whilst being in space. Yeah, there were things that didn't super make sense, you know, with like the rapiers and sword, but it was cool. And once you've been told what the concept is, you know, like a lot of sci-fi and fantasy doesn't make sense. You get told the concept, and as long as the characters don't break the concept of the world, I can suspend my disbelief. I don't have a problem with that. It wasn't like my favorite story. Like, it connected with a lot more elements of Memory Called Empire than Gideon. But I also think that when I reread Gideon, knowing what Gideon was, much like This Is How You Lose the Time War, I'll be able to enjoy it a lot more because I'll know what to expect. And I need to do that before I read Harrow, because I want to make sure that I like remember all the things.
Yeah, Harrow's on my desk, my side table by my bed. Actually, I need to get to it. But I do think, and one thing that I don't think we've really talked about is the emotional journey that Gideon goes through when like having to be an ally and then eventually confronting and having to still work with Harrow. Because I do think that, you know, aside from the aesthetic, I think that is probably the strongest part of the book, is this like conversation about what it means to be two children with two very different experiences of abuse and trauma. That I think Muir actually has quite an interesting conversation about. Yeah, that's all I have to add, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with, I think, Jade's example of, you know, this weird conflict between we're in space, but we have rapiers, and is a great example of how the world building here really is just all about the aesthetic and not so much about, you know, rules, right? And stuff making sense, which is why I think that, Gideon the Ninth is very much more of a space fantasy than a science fiction novel, but, you know,
I mean, that's just so much like,
and that's fine. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
I don't think I would like
science fantasy because time travel makes no sense, you know, like.
Right, and it's the whole it's the whole thing of, well, why do they even, you know, do this necromancy? Why do they, you know, raise skeletons up to be their servants instead of just building robots? The obvious answer is because skeletons are cooler, and that's it. That's all apparently. Right? So once you do get used to the idea that, all right, this is all just sort of, you know, pushing a kind of aesthetic on me, then I think that part's easier to swallow. I was having a bit more issues with like certain unanswered questions, like, okay, Gideon dropped out of the sky when she was a baby, but so she has this mysterious origin, but then that's not really explored as the book goes along, and so
I think we need to be. I mean, I think we need to be extremely conscious of the fact that in science fiction, in science fiction fandom, there has been a lot of, like, so many science fiction and fantasy books have world building that doesn't actually make sense, that only exists because it is cool. Like a time travel book exists because time travel is cool. It doesn't exist because time travel is like and it's just like the idea that something is, just for aesthetic or just because it's cool, or that is not really science fiction, because I do agree that it has an epic fantasy feel and that it certainly has like fantastical elements, but like you don't hear this idea of it's not really a science fiction because the science doesn't make sense when it's a dude writing it. And I do think we want to be careful about that.
Well, I mean, that certainly wasn't where I was,
No, I know it. I know that that's not where you are coming from, like, in terms of your specific intention. But I think it's
well, I mean, for example, I think Star Wars is space fantasy and not science fiction.
Yeah, no, Star Wars makes sense.
Yeah. So
can I hop to a different point though?
Sorry.
I just want to push back on the idea that we have to have this deep exploration of her having this mysterious origin, if only because Muir goes into this, I think, knowing that she's writing a series. And so establishing that it is a thing that exists in the first book is, I think, almost in the vein of Star Wars, right? Like, we know with Rey that Rey has mysterious background. Oh, who am I? And that's all we get for the first two movies, right? And we can say whether or not that's good storytelling or not, but it's a common thing. And I don't know that I think that not going in depth into that makes the book itself bad, because I think she's threading it throughout. She's intending to thread it throughout.
I wasn't saying that was a thing that made the book bad. I wasn't saying that at all. I was just saying that it was wonderful, just many unanswered questions in the narrative.
Right, and I think that
I'm sorry, I don't mean to misinterpret.
I think that in general, like, I enjoy science fantasy, but there was just something about the way that it was written in this book that like didn't work for me. And I don't think that, we could necessarily negate that by, saying that this is, different things are going to work for different people, even if those like elements are generally things that I enjoy. For some reason, I didn't enjoy them in this book. It didn't work for me. But I do agree that doesn't make those things bad things. It's just that in this instance, it didn't work for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Claire.
No, I just really, really don't like the argument of it's not proper science fiction because the science makes no sense, and it just like makes me, But please actually talk.
Yeah, and I mean, I wasn't saying that it's just that like I generally like a blend of science and fantasy, but for some reason it didn't work for me in this book. And I'm not saying that it's a bad book because of those things. It's just the way that it played out in this one, for some reason, didn't work for me.
I think tonally it's also very different book to book. Like, you could easily say that N.K. Jemisin's is like fantasy with sci-fi combined as well. To be honest, when we're categorizing books for the BookTube SFF Awards, it's one of the hardest things to decide what goes in what category, because sci-fi and fantasy overlap in all areas, and there's so much that could go in either category. We get a lot of questions about what goes where. Sometimes you just have to make a decision and go, it goes in here because this. And I think from the marketing standpoint about this being space, that's what put this into sci-fi. But when you've read it and you know what the plot and setting and everything is, it could arguably be either or. I think it would easily fit in either category. But Lee,
and so many writers these days are just genre bending all over the place. I mean, that's
exactly.
So so at a certain point, we're just going to kind of get to just to where we have to just call it all speculative fiction, because like the specific categories, unless you're unless you're explicitly saying I'm doing hard science fiction or I'm doing epic fantasy or planetary romance or whatever, just there's so much now that's just being blended together.
Yeah.
And I think that's just I think that's a good thing, because this is a genre of the imagination.
Yeah, Lee, we've been completely overstepping you, so tell us what
you're
you
totally
thought.
fine.
I
don't have a lot to add, except that kind of along with that genre discussion, this is also a murder mystery, right? Like, I'll be perfectly frank, I did not like Gideon the Ninth. When I first finished it, I felt like it was okay. Now that I've had time to sit on it for a couple of months, I actively dislike it. And the reason why is because the first half of the book is incredibly slow, and then in the second half, all of a sudden we develop this murder mystery, and the book behaves as a murder mystery from that point forward. And personally, this is such a personal, like, persnickety thing, and I get that. But for me, I hate a mystery that relies on withholding information in order to give you a big reveal at the end. And this was a murder mystery in which the reader absolutely did not have the information needed to solve it, right? And so then there's this big reveal that happens, and I hated it. Like, I actively hated the way that resolved. I did not enjoy it at all. I hated that it was just, here's this, even though we kind of knew that there was something about this character that of course we didn't know, I did not like it when it was revealed. I didn't like that it was something that we couldn't have figured out. It bothered me a lot. I also didn't like that the resolution of the novel relied so heavily on a character behaving in what I felt after spending a book with her was an extremely out of character fashion. I did not believe it. Like, I didn't buy into the ending of this at all. So for me, Gideon the Ninth didn't work, and that's why I didn't like the mystery, and I didn't like the out of character behavior. I didn't like it. Sorry.
Fair enough. Well, that concludes that one. Let's move on to the next one before we completely run out of time. So, Recursion. Let's go on to that, which is time travel-y. So, let's dive in. Who wants to go for that one? Jade?
Sure. I actually really like this one. I read this after having already read Dark Matter a year or two ago and absolutely loving Dark Matter. So I had pretty high expectations going into this one. I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much, and it was a little harder to grasp, but I mentioned earlier, I really like books that explore memories. And obviously that's, that's obviously a big part of this book. And I really like that element. And I also like time travel-y stuff, and I thought it was a lot of fun, and I really liked it. Especially like the ending, things got a lot more intense than I was expecting it to, and I had a lot more emotions at the end than I was expecting, because I didn't really feel like I had connected emotionally to the characters that much, but by the end of it, I definitely had, and I just thought it was a good time.
Cool. Bree, do you want to go on Recursion?
Sure. I don't know. This one didn't just feel good to me, I guess. I'm not a huge time travel person to begin with. And also there was something about the tone that to me just didn't sit quite right. And I think it's got to do with the overlapping ways that the story kind of rewrites itself as you go, which isn't to say that that's not innovative or interesting. I liked the fact that people kind of caught up with where they used to be and things like that, and how that was handled. But yeah, it just wasn't my favorite. To me, it just kind of was a story I read and didn't leave a ton of impression.
Fair enough. Claire?
Yeah, this one I actually liked better than I thought I would. It is another one that's been talked about in kind of like Dark Mirror-esque comparisons, like The Test, and both of them I expected not to like for that reason, and it turns out that I actually quite like this one. I am a time travel person, so all the bits that are like going back and back and back over, like all those kind of timey-wiminess, I really, really enjoyed. I will say I don't think the pacing works that well for me, because the beginning of the book it's not slow, like you're reading it and you're not thinking this is slow paced and boring, but it is more linear, and I understand why it does that, right? It tells you some linear backstory, and then it's like, oh, time travel, and then all of a sudden it's like boom 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 boom, time travel everywhere. And I understand that, but I do think for that reason, even though I have a really strong idea of the two main characters separately because of the long bit at the beginning where you get their linear stories and you get to know them, the dynamic between them just didn't really work for me because you meet them when that dynamic has already been established, because obviously time travel, one of them already knows the other and all that. And I liked the kind of like the way the mystery resolved it of how to fix, you know, the issues with the time travel, the big like, you know, climactic scene at the end of how the whole book gets resolved. That I thought was interesting, but the resolution of the relationship between the characters I did not like. And like I just, you know, it's really hard to explain without spoilers, but basically I feel like the way that he ended it, which is like, you know, at the beginning of a scene where you can think of what the scene is gonna be, I'm like, I would have actually just wanted to have that scene, because I feel like without that scene it's kind of like, you know, you have power dynamics because one person already knows the other, and then there's been time travel. And so yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, you know, again, don't want to get into spoilers, but I just felt like it ended a little bit too early because of that particular thing. And for me, I wanted a little bit more to not feel like too queasy about it when I think about that relationship, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense to people who've read it. But yeah, I just really like all of the plot stuff. I just think the character stuff, for me, the pace was a little uneven to, you know, enjoy the character stuff as much as I could have.
Fair enough. Lee, do you want to dive in on this one?
Sure. I don't have a ton to add to what's already been said. I felt like I had a lot of fun reading this. I was very entertained. I had a good time, but it didn't really ever engage me emotionally. I loved the time travel elements. I have like a really irrational and like overwhelming fear of Alzheimer's, so I loved like the whole idea of like memory and the way that affects reality. So all of that worked really, really well for me. I thought it was really fun, but it hasn't stayed with me. Like since I finished this book, I haven't thought about it again.
And Thomas?
Yeah, I would agree with both Lee and Claire. This book is very much like Dark Matter in that it's a book that is sort of superficially fun and enjoyable if you read it with the idea that, yeah, this would be a cool movie to watch on Netflix. But it doesn't really have offer much in the way of substance beyond that. Time travel stories, again, timey-wimey stuff. It's tough to pull off, but at the end of the day, I really do have to agree with Claire about the resolution involving the characters, particularly. So in that regard, I probably liked this one a bit less than Dark Matter. But yeah, as Lee said, you know, it kind of goes in one eyeball and out the other when you read it. You know, you can enjoy it on a superficial level while it's happening, and then you set it aside and and you're done.
I actually like this one a lot, but I think a large part of that is because I read this as a book club book, which meant that I've already had this discussion that we're having here, and my book club is really cool, and like I love them, and they come up with far more intelligent things to say than I do. But we've had this discussion, and it went on for ages. So it was a book that I found really easy to talk to people about, and I think that's the nice thing about it, is that it provokes discussion, and it's a very interesting concept. I haven't read Dark Matter, although I'm not sure I will, because I hear they are very similar. So I'm not sure I want to read a very similar story again. But yeah, I really like this one. I agree with completely what you're saying about the resolution at the end, and that was why it didn't get a super high rating from me. But I otherwise really enjoyed it, and I definitely like the memories part. I think Helena was like my favorite character of the two. I really don't like gritty cop noir stories, and I really thought that's where this was going when it started, and I was like, oh god, this is going to be awful, but it changed.
Yeah, I mean, I also read it this month, so like when it opens and it's a cop, I was just,
I know, exactly. I was like, this is going to be horrendous, not my thing.
He doesn't cop for very long at all.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it was all good. It changed around, but I was quite surprised by some of the directions it took. And I don't read a huge amount of sci-fi or a huge amount of time travel, so I think that's part of what I liked it as well.
I mean, I thought it was really cool in terms of just the I think it would make an incredible movie. Like, I think,
definitely.
That I didn't like about the if you had two really good actors with really good chemistry, like that stuff that I didn't like about the characters, they could sell that. 100%. So
cool.
And I thought the ending, it went to like a really dark place that I wasn't expecting. And I remember it being like, I have no idea how he's going to resolve this. And I don't know. I agree that the character ending probably wasn't as good as it could have been, especially considering Dark Matter. I felt like he had really good character work and I was very emotionally attached to those characters compared to these. But the plot ending, I thought was really good. I don't know. Some people don't like it, but I liked it.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so let's vote and see whether anything can possibly beat out A Memory Called Empire. So let's see.
A Memory Called Empire is like the Helen Mirren of this year's book.
Yeah. Tricky to beat A Memory Called Empire. So Bree, do you want to tell us what your vote for this category was?
Memory has my vote.
Tell us.
Yeah, I hate to be boring, but it's Memory again. Sorry.
Jade?
I'm going to be an outlier. I'm going with Recursion.
Claire?
Memory.
Which means Memory wins, probably, but let's go through the last two just to see. Lee?
It's Memory for me.
Definitely. I would have voted Recursion as well, Jade, so we would have been on the same page there. But definitely A Memory Called Empire is the winner on this one. What won in the popular vote, Brie?
Sorry, I thought I was on mute.
You're okay.
Memory won in the popular vote.
Memory as well. It's done very well this year. It's been very good, especially because it's a debut. I'm always very impressed when a debut wins the best SF or best fantasy. So,
okay, Lee, I'm so sorry I know we're behind. What's your Tixkalani name?
It's Nine Lightning.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I thought it was very cool as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Question.
Yeah, I went with 12 Asphodel.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. I'm glad that you were also enough of a nerd for this book that you went and found your Tixkalon name.
Yeah. I think a few people.
I thought the test was wrong. The test told me to go for a scientific concept, and I was like, no.
That's great.
Cool. Okay, let's go on to the best fantasy. So I'm going to have to do another little switch around for a few people.
Everyone.
So, yeah, let me get rid of some people. Everyone wave. It makes it easier for me to get rid of you.
Somebody at some point was like, oh, I always wave when I end a Zoom call. And I was like, what kind of monster doesn't wave at the end of a Zoom call?
Lee, do you want to stay in this one because you've read them and we're missing Gavin? So
I can, sure. I have read them.
In fact, Thomas, you could also come back in if you want on this one.
And I'm not in this one.
No, Thomas.
Caitlin, I'm not in this one.
Oh, you're not in this one. Sorry, I've switched the wrong people in. I keep confusing Jade and Joss on my screen. Sorry. It's entirely my fault. There we go. I think we're back now with the right people. Yeah, looks good. Okay. Fantasy, the last one. Let's see if we can make this happen. Fantasy then. So, 3 in this category. The Starless Sea. Should we start off with that one? Because this one's been a bit of a party. Bit of a mixed bag, I think, in some of the comments I was seeing. So, who wants to dive into the Starless Sea from this? Claire?
Yeah, sure. So the Starless Sea, I'm going to start by saying that I've never read Erin Morgenstern. I've not read The Night Circus. and I knew kind of going in that people love this author, but that there was a bit of a mixed response to this book, and people were saying stuff about like it's very plotless and it's very much about the writing and not the plot. And I thought, oh boy, this is gonna be a book that I'm not gonna like. And I was very positively surprised by it. I actually, I found the beginning of it quite not difficult, but just like I kept not wanting to pick it up again. I kept listening to a bit of the audiobook and being like, it's fine. I mean, we've all heard the pitch of this book, which is this guy finds a book and his life story is in the book. And so when that happens, it's not particularly like exciting, and it's only a tiny bit of his story anyway, and it's just not like, I mean, yes, you like books, it's like it didn't feel like he had a character properly when it started. And then when you kind of get into more of the actual like fantasy story and the adventure and the look, I think for me what really worked about it was the narratives interweaving and how meta it was about the role of narrative and how stories work and all of that. I really just like explorations of meta. I am deeply interested in stories and narrative and the way that we, transformative fiction, fan fiction, like the way that we engage with stuff that we love. And so for me, the myth, the fairy tale, all that kind of stuff, like, I see people in the chat saying there wasn't a plot, and like there wasn't like a ton of plot, but I thought what thread there was, I managed to like follow and enjoy because it had so much of this cool, interesting meta-narrative stuff. I am not sure I would have gotten as far as the bits that I enjoyed if I didn't have to read it for the award, because I was on page like 100 or something and going like, oh my god. And I would have DNF'd it earlier than that if it weren't for the awards, I think. So, I'm pleasantly surprised. It's definitely not my favorite, but, I thought it was going to be much more of a slog for me than it actually was. And I like the way it resolved.
I think for me, it was more of a case of, I work in advertising, right? And there's something that they always say, which is when you're thinking of ideas, just toss everything out there and then try and see where they interconnect. And I was reading the book, and all I was thinking is that, this clearly Erin Morgenstern like follows this rule of thought, because it was very slow, it was very sprawling. It was like she was just, I will follow this thread, and then I will follow this thread, and then I'll follow this thread, and hopefully I will just put on a prayer and a hope that they all connect. And I just thought she was very lucky that they did. I honestly think she was telling separate stories, and they was just like, please make it work. Aha! This is where it works. And then she just says, see, I had it all figured out from the start. I'm like, nope, Erin, I do not believe you. This happened per chance. It was by chance. You did not actually have this coming. So yeah, I enjoyed it, but I was just like, Erin Morgenstern is an advertising person. She's just selling us bullshit. I was just like, it's a full-on story. I had this idea. I'm like, I don't buy it, lady. I like your hustle, and I appreciate the fact that you like it to me, but I don't buy it. So yeah, that was just me.
I can see what you're saying. It does sound like she threw everything at it, and then it must have been a hell of an edit. It must have been such a mess to edit because there's so much. But yeah, I mean, very lucky and/or a very good editor. What can you say?
True. Joss?
So I also read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, and I'm just convinced that her writing doesn't work for me. There are sometimes I can really get into nonsensical writing, and there's plenty of books that I love that like I don't have to care about the plot. I just don't feel that way with her books. I always feel like I'm missing that element. So like I would have DNF'd it if I wasn't reading it for the live show because I knew it wasn't like a me thing. But I didn't. It's
Fair enough. Lee?
I'm going to be the outlier on this one, and I know it. And I'm going to tell you all from the beginning that I do not have the ability to be objective about this, because in exactly the way that Josh just said, this book is not for her. It is for me. Like, this book was written for me, and it does so many things that I don't like normally, right? Like, it's got this horrible case of insta-love. It leaves you with more questions than it answers. It does all of these things that typically in a book I hate, that are enough to totally turn me off of it. And I love this book with my whole heart and soul, like enough that I would like tattoo it on my body. I loved this book because there was just something about not even like the story necessarily, but about the feeling of being in this world that just like climbed into my soul and decided to live there. And I am head over heels for this book. I love it so much. And I know that that is not reasonable, because I've read and heard so many critical reviews of this. And every time I hear one, I'm like, yeah, all of that is true. Like 100%, I agree with all of that. And I don't care. Like, I just don't care. It worked for me. I have described this book a number of times that it feels like falling in love, right? In that, like, it hurts you a little bit, and it also feels really good. And it's this thing that you look at that you're like, I know that this is not perfect, but for whatever reason, it is so perfectly suited to me. And that's how I feel about the Starless Sea. So that is completely subjective, totally just my personal opinion, based on absolutely nothing I can tie to something factual, but I still love it.
Fair enough. Yeah. So I DNF'd this, but I loved The Night Circus. So I'm like a controversial one, where I loved her previous book and I hated this one. I think I had the wrong expectation, because what I really wanted from this was a sequel to The Night Circus, which this is not. It's a completely different book. And yeah, this really didn't work for me. I only had the audio, which I think was maybe a bit of a mistake, because I think I might have found it easier to get into it if I'd had the Kindle or physical or something like that to read along. I wanted to love this, and I hated it. So yeah, I'm not going to judge it necessarily, but I didn't really like it. So yeah, DNF.
It's so funny because I had it on both audio and physical, and like I had the audio first, then my physical copy arrived, and I was like, okay, let me read it physically. I'm like, nope, my mind wanders. I just constantly, I'm like, Erin, what are you doing? So I just went back to the audio. So I find it funny that you felt like you would have finished it if it had been physical, and I'm like, the only reason I finished this book was because it was on audio, because I was just like,
oh yeah, absolutely same. I'm the same, but I know that about me, and that's got to do with like the way, it's 100% got to do with like me being my specific kind of neuroatypical. Like, I just can't focus on super long books. And yeah, I have, anyway, I like the audiobook, but I had to listen to it on like 2.75 speed or something at the beginning to like get through the bits that I thought were too slow or something. Yeah. And I just, at some point it's okay to call him Zachary and not Zachary Ezra Rollins. I just felt like, come on, I know his name.
That's true. Yeah, I think there were a lot of potential brilliant moments, and I think
there's a lot of things about it that would be super annoying to me. The kind of thing that Lee mentioned, if it weren't specifically a book about stories and fairy tales, right? Because it doesn't super make sense because it's very archetypal, but then again, it's about stories and stories use archetypes. So there's stuff that, it's not going to be my favorite, but I've already said
it looks exactly like the comments are exactly the same and like thoroughly divided on this. We got some people who love it and some people who hate it, and some in the middle kind of like, I don't really know what happened, but it was okay. So I think it's definitely a divisive book for sure. And I'm quite glad that our judges kind of reflect that, actually. So we're reflecting the general populace on this one, but it does seem to be a bit of a weird divisive one. Let's go on to The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Anyone want to take this one? Book. Another massive one.
Very big book.
Really big. Yeah.
So I had a chat with some friends about why this book was one book, because it should have been a duology or a trilogy. Possibly there was definitely enough story in there to be several books. And of course, what I was told by some friends who follow YA publishing more than I do is that obviously Samantha Shannon is writing the Bone Season series, and she's like in the middle of writing that, and people are expecting that from her. And she was just like, oh, I need to tell this story, and wrote like 850 pages of it. And probably her publisher was like, we are not starting another trilogy with you right this second. I don't know if that's exactly why. But like,
which is funny, because she is writing a second book. She's writing like
there's a second book.
She mentioned on her Instagram. She's writing. It's not like a direct sequel, but it takes place in that world, and you will probably like have new characters and old characters. Because the ending of this book, I'm like, how do you write a book that is so fucking long, right? And at the same time have such a rushed ending? So and then I'm like, there's so many other things. So the way it ended, I was like, there has to be another book. And then I went and I was like, see, she's going to write a somewhat of a sequel that is not connected.
Well, the thing
that is connected.
Yeah, the thing with this book is I was reading it, and I was obviously listening to the audiobook. I'm never going to read an 850-page book on paper, but I was reading it and I was enjoying it all the way through. I was just kind of like, oh, this is interesting. This is, the type of epic fantasy that I like. There's a lot of like interesting like cultures with different beliefs on certain things. There are things that I feel like she could have done the world building in a way that would be a little bit clearer, like the different types of dragons, for instance, that kind of stuff. But overall, I enjoyed it all the way through, but it kind of, because it was one giant book, it felt like the characters went on such like a massive journey from the beginning to the end of the book that, like, if you think back at the end of the book to who these people were at the beginning of the book, it's a little bit like, well, that took it, I don't know. I just think there was, you still have read that amount of words, right? And even if the book is good, and even if you're not bored all the way through, it still feels like this has been very long. And I don't know. I liked it okay. I do think that it was way too long, but it's weird because I couldn't tell you, like, there was a section like of 100 pages that should have been 50. Like, it's not like, oh, this should have been edited or whatever. It's just that, like, I don't know. There was just a lot of it, and I feel like I would have enjoyed it better if it had been separate books. But I don't know if that makes any sense.
I think that makes sense. I get where you're coming from. Yeah. Joss?
It feels in several books. When I was reading it, I did feel like it was hitting the beats of like a trilogy. That said, I'm not like mad at it because I do enjoy like marathoning a full series. So it felt like I probably would have, if this was a trilogy, I probably would have wanted to read all three of them back to back anyway. But the ending was pretty rushed. Even still, like, I had a really good time reading it. I would consider picking up the Bone Season when there were a few more books out.
Cool. Lee?
There were a lot of things about this that I liked. Like, I'm such a sucker for a dragon story. Like, give me a dragon fantasy any day. I love them. I have always loved them. I started reading Dragon Riders of Pern when I was like way too young. And I have this deep love for awesome. That's awesome. So I have this deep love for dragon fantasy. So I went into this predisposed to really, really like it. And there were a number of things that I liked about it. My primary complaint with it is that it was too long to be as sloppily constructed as it was. I didn't like that the resolution of the story relied heavily on two main characters, but the focus of the book was on one of them. And then this other one, like, she appears throughout the book, right? But then she sweeps in at the end. It is absolutely essential to the way that the story wraps up. And I didn't feel like I had spent enough time with her for her to be as important as she ended up being in the climax. I would have liked to spend more time on that climactic action and less time on some of the, like, the political stuff and the world building stuff that happened earlier. I think for it to be one book and for it to be this long, priority should have been given to different things. That's my complaint with it.
That's so smart.
I agree. I agree,
Yeah.
because I know I was like, Tane's storyline was I felt slightly cheated, especially because, like you, I love dragons, and her heart-centered the dragons. So I was just like, yay! You know, and the story starts with her. So you have such high expectations with how this story is going to go. This girl that is, in one hand, so benevolent in saving someone, but at the other hand, so brutal enough to be like, you're not about to ruin my chances for this life that I've worked my butt off to build, you know. And there is so much that I love how layered the characters were. From Sabran was layered, Ede was layered, Tane was layered, our alchemist, what was his name again?
Nicholas.
Yeah, Nicholas was also layered. Like, I love how layered characters were, and I'm like, yo, Samantha, to put in this much work to have these characters feel so realistic, you did all of them, and us is disservice by not fully exploring their stories. So yes, I absolutely agree with you on that. I did enjoy it.
And I would say also, it is really helping me, like, sort out my feelings about it to hear y'all talk about it, so thank you. But I would say another thing, like, for me, one bit that felt rushed was, again, without spoilers, the bit with, like, the scary witch. I was just like, well, that's out of nowhere. And I was just, it feels like, you know, they reference it as if they've been mentioning it, but I'm like, but have you? Because I didn't notice it earlier on. I feel like, and, you know, again, I was just saying I think it's too long, but I'm just like, but have you considered that you could have made it all that story into one Robin Hobb length trilogy? I am suggesting make it a lot longer, because even just talking about it now, I'm like, oh my God, I love this so much. Like, the world building, the character, the potential of it. There are a lot of issues with there are issues with it. And I think, like, because of the issues with it, I'm not loving it as much as I otherwise would have. But I was also a Dragon Riders of Pern kid, and so, like, I mean, talk about something incredibly problematic, but, you know,
no kidding.
I feel like I mean,
I don't have too much to add to you guys, to be honest. I think I agree mostly with what you've all said. I think this one's actually my favorite in this category, but it's also not one of my favorite books, if that makes sense. Like, this category for me, I'm a bit sad because Best Fantasy is, like, my favorite category, and yet I didn't love any of the books in this category that much this year.
That's how I felt about short fiction, to be honest.
Yeah, it wasn't my favorite BookTube SFF fantasy year, and I feel like there's lots of stuff that came out that should have been on this list that wasn't. So I was pretty sad about that. But having said that, this one I did enjoy. I audiobooked it, so for me it felt quite quick, even though it's a really long book. But I think that's just because I listened to like 2-3 times speed audio, so it went by quite quickly. But I really liked the sort of female focus throughout all of this. I liked that she was really prominent with that the whole way through. It's a matriarchy, and it's really, really all about the ladies. Yeah. I do think you're right in that some of the ladies were definitely not as built up as the others, and I would have liked it to be 3 POVs instead of 1. I think that would have worked far better as an overall kind of plot. And I do think I'd be interested in going back to this world and seeing what else she brings out in it, because Yeah, it's a very interesting world, and I feel like the politics was handled really, really interesting as well. So lots of kind of good bits, but maybe needed to be split up, or maybe needed to be longer. I think you're right, one or the other. It's kind of that weird middle road, isn't it, where it's like a really long standalone. We don't see that many of them, to be honest. It's quite a unique thing, but I'm not sure it worked as well as it was intended to. So yeah. Interesting book. And our final one in this category then is Gods of Jade and Shadow.
Shadow.
You want to go first? You look prepared.
Sylvia Moreno Garcia is a goddess, and I'm glad that one of her books finally made it to the BookTube SFF Awards.
Great.
I am 100% biased. She's one of my favorite authors, but
totally fair.
I mean, this book is amazing. Who doesn't want death gods? Who doesn't want to read about this kick-ass Maya girl? Like, it's great. It's great. And Sylvia Moreno Garcia knows how to make such complex characters. She nails her endings, even if I don't always like want them to go where they're going. It makes sense. The people are super complicated, and her villains are horrifying all the time. I love her.
See, here is where, because I had such a blast with this. It's marketed as a Cinderella retelling, except Prince Charming is the god of death. I'm like, yo, I am. Do you know how much I love death?
I didn't see that marketing. I just saw Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and I was like, bye.
It was marketed as the Cinderella story, but instead of Prince Charming, we got God of. And I love death. I love all the depiction of. Every time someone says, "Oh, there's a depiction of death in this book," I am picking up that book because death. My problem with Gods of Jade and Shadow is that it's the reverse of Priory for me. I thought it was too short. Like. I am holding Mexican Gothic, and I'm like, yo, this book is thin. Please do not do this to me. Because clearly Sylvia is like, I'm going to give you a taste, and then that will be it. Right? Because I felt that this complex story about this girl who is not as quiet or as docile as Cinderella, whose mother has always told her to bite her tongue and not say anything, but you can always tell that rebellion is just on the edge. And then, when she accidentally releases the god of death, her life changes. This girl that's always wanted to see the outside world, and the fact that that death is who takes her on that trip. I love that contrast, because usually when you're hearing stories like that, it should be light. She wants to explore the world. She wants to see so many things. I did that she gets to have that experience. Yeah, because the one thing I love about journey stories is seeing how characters evolve on that trip and how they change. So being able to go on that journey and actually being able to take in that experience is a critical part for me. But because the book was so short, that part of the story was rushed for me. I was like, Cassiopeia, I love you, but I wanted a longer journey story. It just felt like we were rushing to the way to the end. And then, which also contributed to the way the conflict between Onkame and Vukukame, the way it was resolved, I thought it was also very rushed. Like, if the story, when I was reading it, I was like, well, I can just borrow 200 pages from Priory of the Orange Tree and then just add it to this book. This would just be perfect. Because I was like, it was so short. So, yeah, I loved it, but it was short. It was short, and so I had it was sad. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't at all feel like there was a problem with like the pace or the construction of it. I was going to say that in contrast to Lee's point about Priory, that I thought that this book was excellently constructed. Now, I've read Sylvia Moreno Garcia before, and I like her, I like the way that she writes mythology a lot. But I thought with this one, there was more of I don't know how to say, there was more of a like it felt like more of a fairy tale maybe than her other, you know, than the other books of hers that I've personally read. I haven't read Mexican Gothic yet. I don't know if it's going to be a for me book. I'm sure it's going to be very good, but you know,
it's great.
I mean, it's more about like my personal taste and not wanting to dislike a book of hers than anything else, honestly. But with this one, I felt like it felt like a fairy tale in terms of like how it starts and like some of the, you know, kind of, I don't know, some of the stuff that you're talking about being rushed, Noria, to me felt more like, well, you know, in a fairy tale or in this kind of a, you know, mythology story, you tend to get like a fairly sparse, like, you know, this conflict happened between this and that character and it was resolved in that way and then it's resolved, you know, where like if it was a conflict between humans, people, not in a fairy tale, maybe it would be like, well, they had this battle and then one person won but the other person like took a long time to accept it and there was some more strife and whatever. And it kind of feels like I don't know, I thought that it had a kind of fairly you know, itself had a myth quality about it, which I really, really liked. And I actually really liked the way that the relationship between the characters worked and the way that the kind of the threat to Onkame's power, where that came from, like what, you know, becoming more human meant to him and like how that portion of the story was resolved between them, the ending and where we leave Cassiopeia and what she's going to be able to like do with her life, I thought were just amazing. And I don't know, I just guess it felt like myth or fairy tale, but it was also very surprising and fresh in terms of like what actually happened. And I suppose that's because I don't know a lot of myth and fairy tale from you know, Mexico, apart from stuff that, you know, having read a bunch of Silvia Moreno Garcia, I feel. So, you know, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's a very traditional like type of storytelling that I'm not aware of, but like to me it felt really refreshing. I really loved it. And her writing is just so beautiful.
Cool. Lee?
I really liked this. I would echo what Claire said, that it felt familiar, like the fairy tale mythology elements of it. I felt like the story was following a predictable track because it did feel like a fairy tale. It felt familiar in that way, but that the content of that fairy tale felt very unique, and I really liked that, like the Mayan mythology elements of it. That so I loved that it took something new and it added it to this storytelling style that I already love. So that worked really, really well for me. I agree that it was very well constructed. I really liked it. I don't have negative things to say about it. I had a good time.
Well, that's good. We like that. That's good news. I also had a good time with this one. Like I haven't read any of her other books, but I enjoyed this one. I don't know much Mexican sort of folk or mythology tales at all, so it was very interesting to get some of that coming through in this story. I completely agree. I think this needed to be longer for it to work really well for me because it has that mythology kind of element to it. You don't have the same emotional connection to gods as you do to humans. It's a harder jump, I think, between the two types of, like, you know, a deity and then humans. So I found connecting with Cassiopeia fine, but I found connecting to like the gods a lot harder, and their story was really interesting from a kind of mythology point of view, but it was harder for me on a personal reading journey kind of perspective. So I think if it was longer and they were taken a bit slower and gone a little deeper into kind of some of the backstories of the gods a little more, I'd have been more hooked into it. But I really enjoyed it. It came off like really fun to me. It was very predictable, but I think most mythology, fairy tale stuff is. So I wasn't unhappy by that. It's just something I noticed. But yeah, it was a fun read. I enjoyed it still, and I definitely want to read Mexican Gothic because I have that one waiting for me. So I'll definitely read more.
Maybe I'm a muppet. I just didn't think it was very predictable.
You know, the thing about it is that the ending, I actually love the fact that the ending was unpredictable because, I'm trying to say this without giving anything away, without any spoilers, but based off of the story and, you know, how things have been going from the start, the way I expected it to end, I was like rolling my eyes already. I was like, yeah, we know we're going to get this again. And then we don't. And I'm like, she really did that. She went that. She took that. I'm like, So yes, that's all I'm going to say. No spoilers, but I was just like,
agreed.
No, I like that. That was a good reaction.
Anyway, Sylvia Martin is great.
Cool. Okay, let's do our judges' vote on this one then, now that we've been through all three of the books. So, let's run through. Lee, who would you vote for on the fantasy?
I know I'm alone in this, but for me, it's the Starless Sea.
Okay, Claire?
Gods of Jade and Shadow.
Joss?
Gods of Jade and Shadow.
Noria?
Gods of Jade and Shadow.
Which means that one wins. My vote would be the Priory of the Orange Tree, but it's fine because I also really like this one. So good options. Let's bring Bree in and she can tell us what the popular vote for this one was. Hey, Bree.
Hi.
So the popular vote came in with a pretty strong lead for Gods of Jade and Shadow.
Yes. Hi. Good work. Popular vote. Cool. So now we know the results of everything, which is quite crazy. It's been a long time coming. We started this way back. I don't even know when. It feels like it's been a long time. It was a long time ago. But we had lots of crazy life stuff in the world, all over the world, that was very disrupted to everyone. So we felt it was necessary to kind of take a little break from focusing on just books and happy things and actually give some time to some of the things that were going on in the wider world. Black Lives Matter was particularly a big thing that mattered to us, to take a step back from, promoting books and actually take some time to delve into personal reading and personal exploration on the internet, to find out a bit more about things we maybe don't know too much about, things that we needed to educate ourselves on. One of the questions you may have noticed when you were filling out your popular vote form was to give a recommendation of something that you really enjoyed. And I wonder, Bree, if you could maybe give us a little rundown of some of those ones that people recommended in their popular vote.
Sure. And I've been going through, and I'm actually in the process of adding this into a bookshelf, a dedicated bookshelf on the BookTube Awards Goodreads right now.
Great.
But there were a lot of recommendations. Some are ones that you probably recognize. So we have Mexican Gothic, N.K. Jemison's The City We Became, Octavia Butler. But a lot of ones that I think are a little bit less known. So we have Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron, Lakewood by Megan Giddings, Mating the Huntress by Talia Hibbert. We have, Witchwood, Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. Yeah, that's a fantastic
that one. Has a gorgeous cover.
Yes, it does. And let's see. The Deathless Divide by Justina Ireland, and a short story collection even by Alietta Bedard. So in total, we wound up with, I think, 37 books to add to that shelf, which is really exciting. I'll also be going through on the Discord and grabbing any books that I see that were mentioned on the similar thread that we had there.
Yeah, and of course we'll probably have a thread up in the Goodreads and the Discord for a long time about this, because we want to keep adding to these lists, and definitely the more you read, which I hope people are now reading more Black SFF, because it's great, and I don't know why people weren't before, but we really need to see more, especially going forwards on our shortlists in the coming years. We want, as judges, I think I speak for all of us, like we want to see more of you guys reading books that are not just by white straight men from the UK or the US, or women, but actually people of color from all over the world, especially Black people. It's something that's really important to us as judges to start promoting more, and it's something that is also really important for you guys to just broaden your horizons and read more diversely and just kind of experience far more stories. I think some of the most interesting books we've spoken about today are the more diverse authors in our collection this year. So yeah, it would be great to keep expanding on this going forward.
And we also know that, you know, it's not, we also know that the marketing pushes behind books, like that's just very skewed. There's so many just complex reasons, systemic complex reasons that mean that if you're a white person and you don't pay attention to making sure that you're picking these things up, it can be really easy to just look back on your reading and realize that it doesn't actually reflect your personal values and what you want to do in the world. So, you know, it's not, like, we all know it's not because we don't want to. It's just actually it does take an effort, and we believe that it's an effort that is worth taking. Yeah, very important too.
Exactly. So yeah, going forward, we as judges hope to inspire you guys with our channels. If you check all of our channels out, I think all of us are making a more concerted effort to read more widely and especially support Black SFF. So hopefully you'll see a lot more of that coming through on our channels, but also, you know, if you have recommendations for us that you want to leave us that we haven't read, please go on the Goodreads or the Discord or anywhere on Twitter, shout at any of us. You know, we're happy for recommendations as well. So we just wanted to really highlight that we took a break because it was a really important topic, and we want to come back with a bang and moving forward really emphasize that this is gonna hopefully change, and we're making, I mean,
this is something we've been talking about for a super long time. We just we have not been, you know, we have been meaning to do something for a long time, and we've haven't done it well enough.
We weren't accountable in previous years.
So yeah, we accept that is a failure of ours in previous years, and that we do want to do better.
Yeah. And in addition to that, there's also now a thread on Goodreads, in the Goodreads group, that's just for feedback. So if you have ideas, we are excited to hear them. We want to, because we're committed to doing better. And we are trusting that you will help keep us accountable for that as well.
Exactly. So hopefully all of this has helped. We'll also probably link some Black booktubers, because there's loads of Black booktubers that people should be watching. So we'll probably add some threads on that as well in the Goodreads and in the Discord. But yeah, hopefully you guys are behind us on this. We think you will be, because you're all pretty nice. So fingers crossed you're on this as well. And I think that's kind of it for the BookTube SFF. So thank you all for joining. It's been a fun one. We've switched loads of judges in and out, so we still do have Jade and Thomas hidden in the background here as well. They're just off screen hiding. But yeah, thank you everyone, and Najiri who's gone for the moment. So yeah, BookTube SFF, it's done. We will let you know about the next year as soon as we have your feedback, I guess. So yeah, thanks all for watching, and we'll see you very soon in another video. Bye.
Bye.